True crime. I'm about to discuss with you one of the most amazing new books that's just come out by recently retired decorated homicide investigator Hank Idsinga from the Toronto Police Department. He's one of the most decorated homicide detectives ever. This is his new book, Hank Idsinga, The High Road, Confessions of a Homicide Cop. This is a very personal book, and he's just done his first national interview about it. And one of the areas he covers in the book is about corruption within the police force. And by corruption, I mean rot at this point, how it's falling apart, and the problems he sees at the top levels. Hank is a very credible guy. How do I know that? I used to be on the Toronto police force for a number of years. I've worked in the city for a number of years. I've done close protection for billionaires. I protected some of the most secure buildings in the world, in and around the city of Toronto. I've worked with cops internationally, all over. I can tell good ones from bad ones. And let me tell you, Hank is the real deal. I've done lots of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews about the department in the media over balls and strikes, when they get it right and when they get it wrong, and the problems they have. And let me tell you, this information coming out from Hank Idsinga, someone on the inside, you're going to hear it like you've never heard it before. I'm going to go through this video with you and give you my reaction to it as he talks. Now let's get into the interview.
I have not stepped foot in police headquarters since September 22nd of 2023, and I don't think I would be welcome back at police headquarters.
Imagine that from the man who was once the most well-known cop in Canada's biggest city. Homicide Inspector Hank Idsinga.
We've never seen anything quite like this.
A senior officer working on some of the most notable crime cases in Toronto.
It's a serial killer.
Including the investigation into serial killer Bruce McArthur.
Let me go right here with the introduction of Hank Idsinga. He not only was, he probably is one of the most widely known police officers, homicide investigators in North America, due to the horrific murders he covered. I met up with Hank when he was doing the investigations into the Bruce McArthur murders. He was a guy who went and kidnapped gay people off dating sites, then had sex with them and butchered the bodies, and then put them through wood chippers and hid them in planters and gardens all around. It was one of the most extensive and expensive homicide investigations, I think, in North American history. And Hank was the point man on this. And this was one of the most heated political ones, too. And he was the point guy on it. But let me tell you something else. When I was there and I would scrum him at the homicide scenes, he was one of the best people at handling the media I've ever dealt with. I've dealt with lots that are lousy at handling the media. Many that can't handle the media. Many that give you the police answer that means nothing. Hank wasn't that way. He said what he could without compromising the investigation. And I had my eye on him for the way he was handling this investigation. You should also know I've talked to a lot of serious cops. When I say serious cops, they've been around, they've had long careers. They've worked in some of the toughest divisions in the city. They've worked on many cases, guns and gangs and robbery, and just uniform cops who came across Hank. Every one of them said to me, he's a first-class guy. He's real police. You might not get that if you're not police. When a cop says he's real police, they mean what he's about is doing policing, not about all the other games. Can't get a much higher compliment from senior cops. Let's continue on.
Proud to be a cop, but proud of the Toronto Police Service, he worries about that force and bigotry.
I could write a book centered around that topic.
Racism, antisemitism.
Racism, antisemitism, tyrannical behavior, corruption, dysfunction in the senior ranks.
This particular interview is centering around this aspect of the book. It's a portion of the book. His homicide life is much bigger and much more in depth. But here he comes forward to talk about anti-Semitism, racism, tyrannical behavior at the top of the police department, and he speaks out about it. So let me tell you, I back him up on that 100%. Let me tell you why. I've noticed this thing around cops when I was a cop. Police are brave people, right? They'll run into bank robberies. They'll go where guns are out. They'll enter in where knives are. They do all kind of brave things. But when it comes to standing up to the brass, when the brass is being abusive, tyrannical, racist, anti-Semitic, or other problems, they sit on their hands and say nothing. I can remember one time we had at the station I was at, there was an absolutely ridiculous leader for the division. I'm not going to go into the details about it, but just ridiculous. Everybody would meet in cars and talk about how tyrannical, ridiculous, and crazy this person was. He was making everybody's life miserable. You know, there's an old saying, they treat you better out on the streets than they do in the station a lot of the times. That's when you've got bad leadership. Well, in this case, we were having our Sunday morning meeting and we we're going to talk about it. And I told the guys, well, let's bring it up and let's have this discussion with them. The time came, time to bring it up. I raised my hand and brought a few issues up. The leader at the time turned around to the rest of the odd 35 people that were there and said, will anybody else have anything to say about that or to join in on that? Silence, locked their mouths, threw away the keys. Said, okay, well, that's the end of that discussion, he said, and it was over. I had more discussions about that after when we got out on the road with everybody who sat on their hands. But that's unfortunately the way it is in policing. It's just like abuse in families. Somebody's abusing one of the kids in the families, the daughters or something. No one else in the family really talks about it, but they all know about it. So for him to come out and discuss this is really groundbreaking. Because when you're on the job, and I can tell you examples about this, and you come out to talk about corruption and problems on the job, poor leadership, tyrannical leadership, misuse of resources, they will come after you and work to ruin your career in many cases. So I'm giving Hank the thumbs up for bringing these issues up. Let's continue on to what he has to say.
He did write a book about his 34 years in policing.
A witness actually sees him putting his Walkman headphones on. He was charged with first-degree murder.
Cases solved, those that haunt. That he called his book The High Road, sign enough he didn't entirely expose what or who enraged him.
When I was the inspector.
What he is willing to say is bad enough.
And they touch on here a couple of interesting pieces picked up by the interviewer here. Notice the title of his book, The High Road. Well, that defines the road that he took every time he needed to when he made a decision as a police officer. You know, when you're a police officer, you got to decide the high road or the low road. Trust me, I've seen both. And I've seen people who it depends whether they take the high road or the low road. You want cops who take the high road. I think that's a great start for the title of this. Then he gets into the confessions. It's funny because homicide detectives, Hank's taken a lot of big confessions. Hank's gotten a lot of real confessions. And the other word you can say for those confessions are Hank got to the truth of what was going on. So this book for Hank are his confessions as a homicide cop. Touches on a little bit here. I can't wait till I get to read the full book. You can order it anyways. Get it on pre-order. It's going to be an amazing read. They talk about the haunting of being a homicide investigator. Well, just about any cop who's been on for a number of years in any city will be able to tell you they've seen some things that haunt them. You know, as police, you need to be able to take them. You need to buck up, stand on them, get by them. You can see some horrific things. Horrific. I can remember there was times for myself where I had attended some rather horrific calls. The day before Christmas, one time, had to attend for a attempted suicide of a young girl. Got there, saved her. She'd taken a lot of pills. Wrote the report on it, did it up. Doctor saved her. Parents came down. She was from a very, quite well-to-do family in the city. The next day, Christmas Day, I'm with family, giving out opening the presents, waiting for the people to get their little things, all the joy on their face. It was good. My phone rings. I pick it up. Hey, Ross, you attended this address the other day for an attempted ending of the life of the young lady? Yeah, I did. What's up? Well, we're here now. She succeeded. I won't go into how the body was found. And in the meantime, I'm sitting on the phone watching everybody having a good time doing stuff. I just hung the phone up. and continued on having fun. You'll find that cops, when they share their stories, tend to share the good stories and the funny stories, not the real stories. The stories this man can tell, well, I'm going to have him on my podcast, and we're going to get to some of those stories. Let's listen to more of what Hank has to say.
I don't go around telling people, my grandfather was a Holocaust victim. So people, when they don't know my background, perhaps let their guard down a little bit. There was an officer in the ranks above me who referred to a kosher barbecue as a Jew queue. And I kind of said, you think that's really an appropriate term? And they were like, oh yes, it's hilarious. I thought, no, it's not so funny, right? Considering 20th century history. And I kind of left that alone. And it was months later when there was a video on our internal intranet, and one of the officers featured in the video, unbeknownst to me at the time, was Jewish. And I walked in on the same senior officer who was watching that video, and they paused that video and looked at me and gestured towards the screen and said, the only reason he gets away with this is because he's a fucking Jew. And that blew me away. And months later, I was with that same senior officer on our way to a meeting with a lawyer who happened to be Jewish. And that senior officer said, I can't believe we have to pander to this fucking Jew. And that really was a seminal moment when I said, okay, you know what? I was pretty sure you're a Jew hater. Now I'm positive you're a Jew hater.
You said this to him?
And I kept it to myself. I sat in that meeting and literally didn't say a word. Just kept my head down, thinking this is repulsive.
This is an astonishing recounting that Hank makes of dealing with senior officers. And don't forget, I'm not sure at what point this is, he was the inspector in charge of the homicide squad. There was only so many people up above him who were senior. Now, where this really becomes important, this antisemitism, these slurs that he alleges that were made, this Jew hatred, as he put it, which was pretty plain to him, is of real importance these days, because ever since October 7th, Toronto has been deluged with anti-Semitic hate marches and with many, many controversial lack of enforcement by the Toronto Police Service. So much so that the Solicitor General wrote twice to the chief saying, do your job, to no avail. Nothing much has changed. There's been all sorts of complaints about the way it's been policed. I myself have been to many of those protests, and the worst ones. And I think that the policing, in my humble opinion, was in an exact opposite direction in order to create more Jew hatred. That's my opinion. There hasn't been anybody answering for this yet, because it's hard to get answers when you go up against the brass in the police department. So Hank says he put his head down for the moment. Sometimes you got to put your head down for the moment. It does you no good to lose it if you can't do anything to change it. Some things need to change at the top of the Toronto Police, in my humble opinion. I've seen it myself for how poorly it's run.
Repulsive, yes. And also he suggests a pattern of anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism. Here's just one example. There are, he says, more.
I had 12 detective sergeants in homicide running the 6 investigative response teams. 2 of those officers were Black. And we had a senior officer who, at one point in time or another, summoned those 2 officers to their office and verbally tore a strip off of them. And they come back and they report to me, and I'm like, they haven't done that to any of the other detective sergeants in homicide. Probably could have justified doing it on some occasions, some of the other officers, but only did it to those 2. And in that case, I don't even think they realize they're doing it. But it's obvious to the people who are watching that it's being done.
Here, Detective Idsinga makes an astounding claim, which I believe myself, because I saw it and I talked about it in the last segment. Many of the senior officers that are in charge of the protection now of the Jewish community are the same ones who he says were involved in some of this anti-Semitic behavior that he saw condoned and going on. It bleeds over into the streets. He talks about how many of these senior officers are in a bubble. And believe me, many of them are in a bubble. Many of them are drunk with power, drunk with command, knowing they can ruin someone's career in a heartbeat if they want to. Something I just want to remind you of here. Hank is a senior, well-weathered homicide detective. You know what happens to senior homicide detectives? They go up into the stand and they get cross-examined on thousands and thousands of pieces of evidence to a minutia, to a minute on every decision that they make. When they put something in a report, when they testify on the stand, they're going to be cross-examined by some of the smartest lawyers going. And if you don't have your act together, they'll break you and you'll lose your case. So when Hank makes a claim about something and he says something, he's doing it with that level of experience, that level of knowing what the word means. Once again, the high road, police doing police, when people say he's the real police, it means your word is your word is your word. And you get cross-examined on it. So when he says something, this isn't just the idle conversation of someone who has something to say to complain. Hank's pretty good at finding evidence and presenting it.
The person you're talking about who's clearly an anti-Semite, the senior officers who picked on the black officers,
Yeah.
likely because they're black.
Yeah.
Do you have any reason to think that they then took those abhorrent behaviors into the public realm?
The senior officers would have very little interaction with the public realm. But if you look at those senior officers who are still in control when we have our post-October 7th protests going on, and everyone's scratching their head and saying, why aren't the police doing anything here? Why are we not seeing a response when it's this particular community that's being victimized? And that very well might explain some of it right there and then.
Do you have any reason to believe that anti-Semitic senior officers were in charge of decisions around deployment around those protests?
Absolutely.
Police services exist to serve the population. So to talk with Hank Idsinga is to know some listening will nod in sad recognition. Others will be newly rattled and maybe scared. I'm trying to imagine the position of a citizen who wants to call the police because of anti-Semitic or racist behavior that they feel victim to. Do they have reason to feel safe in making that call?
If you call to make a complaint about anti-Semitic behavior, let's say, just to package that in a nutshell, you need to be aware that the person you're making that complaint to very well might be an anti-Semite themselves. That's why you have to constantly stay on top of that complaint that you've made. Who's it been assigned to? What's their contact info? What's going on with it, right? That's something the public really needs to do when they do make that complaint.
We are here to make an announcement regarding a lengthy investigation into organized crime and police corruption.
Corruption within the force in Toronto is a subject that continues to come up. 7 serving officers, a retired one, and 19 civilians were recently charged in what became a sweeping corruption and organized crime investigation.
Project South, which is, I got another video on that, on the cartel corruption going on in the Toronto police force. I think it's way more serious than it's being treated, and people don't even know. They don't even know really, if they were to look, as to who gets assigned to be looking into those problems. It's what Hank says. I'll let you figure it out from there as to what's probably going on there.
Idsinga is clear. He's never been afraid to ruffle feathers, but to read the high road is to realize there's a lot left unsaid and key players unnamed. He's not sort of naming them and going after them specifically, taking the high road, or is it not necessarily meeting a duty of care?
Well, I think I try and really illustrate that from day one, the repercussions of standing up. And I'll take criticism. Why is there not a formal complaint? Well, if you read this, you'll understand what happens sometimes with formal complaints.
For people who haven't read it, what happens sometimes?
If the chief who's in charge of police service has promoted his friends, not necessarily based on merit, into very senior officer roles, and somebody makes a complaint, who are they complaining to? The chief. And where is that complaint going to end up? It's not going to go anywhere. And the person who makes that complaint is the one who is likely going to face the repercussions for making that complaint.
Now, Hank is saying out loud in a national television interview what police all know. Silently. You don't say it to each other. You know what's going on when a complaint gets in and who it gets assigned to. He's absolutely right. Watch who gets what cases, who gets what complaints. As an investigator in corporate frauds that I used to do, if I had a big fraud going on, I'd look for the person who stood up and said, "Oh, I'll investigate it," because they want to investigate their own problems most of the time. And that's who I got my eyes on when I start looking into the fraud a little bit closer.
How many decades did you spend encouraging people to come forward if something was wrong? And yet you were nervous to do it. What does that say to someone who doesn't have the power of being in the police force and as tall as you are and as much of a name as you are? If you're apprehensive about sounding the alarm, how is the average citizen supposed to feel comfortable doing it?
Yeah, it's tough. And there's a real problem with the culture of the police service from top to bottom.
Cultural problems at Toronto Police. Let me tell you how deep that one goes. There's this one professor I know that I've worked with before. He has this term that says, culture eats mission. Culture eats vision. You know how every company has vision, mission, values? Culture eats it. I could talk on this for a bit, but let me make this part clear. What happens when you've got a culture at a place? Let's say the culture is to be true blue, do the best job you can, don't quit, win no matter what. Let's take special forces, right? Are you stopping the special forces guy from getting the job done? Why is he getting the job done? Because he's getting paid so much money? No, they're not being paid a lot of money. He's doing it because the culture there is to win, and to win like for your country, for the forces, for the high road. That's why you do what you do. And you do it even in the dark when no one else is there. And many times you get no recognition for it because it's done in the dark. But when the culture takes over in a place that they see that the corrupt way to do it is the way that it happens. Everybody keeps quiet when you see something wrong. You see bad people getting promoted who don't really deserve to be promoted. You keep quiet about it. You see someone in leadership who, man, they're saying some stuff that they should have been fired or gone or disciplined or taught a long time ago, and nothing happens about it. You start to see that that's the culture of the place. And you better fit into that culture or you're going to be gone. And I think there has been a big erosion of culture in the Toronto Police. And it's for the bad, not for the good. I'm not saying there isn't good officers there. Lots of good officers. In fact, the lower down the totem pole you go, the less you'll have that problem for the most part. But there is a culture problem, and it's not being addressed. It's being covered up, but it's bubbling to the surface. It's a wound with an infection in it. You can band-aid it all you want. It's coming back as long as the infection is there. I just wanted to point that out, that is also what Hank is touching on here. There's a culture problem. It's gone the wrong way in the Toronto Police Force. That's my opinion as well.
In the face of all this, another key question. What did he do about all he experienced and witnessed? On that, he holds back.
Without getting into specifics about what I was willing to do and what I wasn't willing to do, suffice to say, I didn't do nothing.
I can't speak for Hank when he says I didn't do nothing, but I know what he means. That is a culture in policing with real police. When you've got a beef with someone's out of line, they're doing stuff that is going to cause nothing but grief or trouble, you straighten them out. You straighten them out, you deal with it. And it's not dealt with in a process through going through the complaining to the sergeant, this, that, and the other stuff. You straighten it out. You let them know. You're not doing that anymore when I'm around. And Hank is a guy who, let me tell you, big guy. I wouldn't really want him leaning into me hard because he disagreed with me on something. Well, more than disagreed. Thought I was doing something corrupt.
While Idsinga says he found a way to deal with his concerns, Toronto police say they cannot substantiate the claims, have clear mechanisms for members to report concerns, and that allegations of discrimination are taken seriously, and they say they seek external oversight where appropriate. Hank Idsinga's book, The High Road, will soon be there for all to read. If a conversation emerges about how to better policing, he says he will be right there ready to help, to deliver justice still.
Hey, here's an idea. How about putting a top investigator to look at the problems within the Toronto Police Department and offer immunity, complete immunity and career protection to anybody who comes forward with credible evidence of corruption, wrongdoing, and poor leadership. Complete immunity from your career being ruined. How about that? How about even some anonymity until they have to make it public who you are? A little bit of a witness protection program for police. Funny that that's maybe where we are. A witness protection program for police who come forward about corruption. And one last little point, which I find a touch humorous here. Cop humor, if you will. Homicide detectives, particularly Hank, they know where all the bodies are buried. They literally know, or they find out where the bodies are buried. And I think Hank knows a lot more that he's being very cautious about. And we'll see in the book what he has in there. But you got to be careful with someone who knows where all the bodies are buried. So this has been my quick reaction to the interview that Hank Idsinga gave. I think it's groundbreaking. I think in many respects it's unprecedented. And I think the timing could not be better for it to get a good look at policing and where it's going. There's a lot of issues out there that need to be dealt with. Buy the book, Hank Idsinga, The High Road, Confessions of a Homicide Cop. I will have him on my podcast to talk about more than this. I want to know about his stories as a homicide detective. If you like this information, you want to get more, follow up more, see when I interview Hank, like, follow, and subscribe to the McLean Chronicles.